The world watched as King Charles prepared to claim the throne, but behind the grandeur, a whisper threatened to destabilize the very foundation of the monarchy. A single confession by the Archbishop has shattered the polished surface, an unrecorded meeting between Harry and Charles. Why was it hidden, and what was truly said? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first glance, the coronation was everything tradition demanded: ceremonial, unified, pristine. The newly crowned King Charles stood at the apex of royal heritage, adorned in symbols centuries old. But as the cameras focused on regal splendor, the real drama had already unfolded, hidden from the lens. A cryptic admission from the Archbishop of Canterbury, uttered weeks after the coronation, has ignited a firestorm in royal circles. "I was there when the two met," he reportedly whispered, refusing to elaborate further. That single sentence was enough to crack the illusion of peace wide open. Because if Prince Harry and Charles met in secret, it wasn't for reconciliation, it was strategy. What followed was silence total, calculated silence from the palace. No denials, no confirmations, just a cold, echoing void that grew more damning by the hour. Insiders say aides were told to avoid all mention of the Archbishop. Staff members, even senior advisors, were reportedly left in the dark. And as the public speculated, the palace's refusal to comment only added fuel to the blaze. What were they hiding? Why did this meeting take place mere hours before the coronation's final rehearsals? What truths were so volatile they had to be buried under layers of silence? This wasn't the reunion of a father and son. It was a closed-door negotiation between a monarch clinging to power and a prince armed with secrets. It was never about healing, it was about control. There were no advisors present, no royal press team, not even Camilla or William, just Charles, Harry, and a man of the cloth caught between heaven and a hellish truth. And though the Archbishop may have kept the meeting confidential at the time, it is now clear he walked out of that room with a burden too great to bury. Images surfaced shortly after grainy, fleeting captures of two figures slipping into a side entrance at Clarence House under heavy shroud. Royal vehicles were rerouted, security cameras allegedly disabled. What unfolded inside remains officially undocumented, but whispers from those close to the Archbishop say the tension in that room could have broken stone. They weren't exchanging pleasantries. They were trading leverage. And somewhere in that exchange, a deal or perhaps a threat was laid bare. That is the crux of it all. What was said in that room? What forced both men to break protocol and risk exposure? Did Harry issue an ultimatum? Did Charles beg for silence in return for something darker, something transactional? The answers may never be fully known. But the fact that this meeting happened at all sends tremors through the monarchy's polished surface. Because if the most sacred of royal rituals, the coronation, was preceded by a secret summit, then what else was manipulated, concealed, or bought? But to understand what unfolded behind closed doors, we must peel back the layers of betrayal, exile, and desperation that led to this hidden rendezvous. Prince Harry's departure from royal life wasn't a quiet escape, it was a volcanic eruption. But what the public never saw were the boiling confrontations and ultimatums that ignited before the secret meeting. This was never just about titles, it was about survival. What followed Megxit wasn't peace, it was pressure. Behind the public smiles and charitable causes, Harry was a man spiraling into psychological chaos. Montecito became both sanctuary and cell. The distance from the royal institution gave him freedom, but it also isolated him from a family that controlled the narrative he was desperate to reclaim. Friends close to the Duke spoke of nights where anger turned to obsession, replaying conversations, revisiting slights, and questioning everything he thought he knew. He had stepped away from the monarchy, but the monarchy had never stepped away from him. Every headline, every leak, every carefully crafted photo-op of his brother and father only deepened the wound. The palace wasn't just moving on without him, they were erasing him. But before Harry turned his back, there were explosions behind closed doors. Conversations with senior palace officials grew increasingly volatile. Sources say at least 2 calls with Charles ended with the prince slamming the phone down, accusing his father of betrayal, deceit, and cowardice. He allegedly called out a calculated campaign to discredit Meghan, warning that he would not stay silent if pushed too far. The rage wasn't random. It was born from the slow, choking realization that nothing would ever change unless he forced it. And as the coronation loomed on the horizon, Harry saw an opportunity, not for reconciliation, but for reckoning. Behind the scenes, Meghan bore the brunt of the emotional toll. The silence from the palace became deafening in Montecito. Rumours swirled around their children, titles denied, security revoked, lineage questioned. And for Harry, it was more than an insult. It was a threat. Those children were part of the royal bloodline, yet treated like afterthoughts. The emotional toll fractured their inner circle. One insider described a tense week where Harry shut himself away, refusing to speak to staff or even close friends. There were whispers of a breakdown, an episode so intense it alarmed even those used to his growing volatility. The pressure was unrelenting, and with the coronation drawing nearer, something had to break. It's no coincidence that weeks before the coronation, the Archbishop reportedly received a mysterious call from California. The voice on the other end wasn't desperate, it was cold, controlled. Some say Harry reached out to the Archbishop not for guidance, but to issue a warning. He would not be ignored, and he would not be silenced. That phone call became the catalyst. The Archbishop, torn between loyalty and conscience, found himself dragged into the storm. It was no longer a matter of royal protocol. It was a question of moral responsibility. Because if Harry showed up at the coronation, it would not be as a spectator. It would be as a force of disruption. And while Harry's fury brewed in California, Charles faced his own storm, one that would push him to an unthinkable decision. For Charles, the crown wasn't just inheritance, it was burden. But what if his reign began with the threat of royal annihilation? Sources suggest the king feared more than bad press, he feared extinction of his bloodline's relevance. As the coronation date loomed, the weight on Charles's shoulders grew heavier than any crown. He was not stepping into the throne as a celebrated unifier of nations, but as a monarch haunted by fractures within his own bloodline. Public support was thinning. Polls dipped. Headlines no longer celebrated the institution, they questioned its purpose. And with every royal engagement, every stiff smile, Charles knew eyes were watching not with admiration, but with skepticism. The trust once granted to the crown had eroded into suspicion, and in private, Charles voiced a chilling fear to those closest to him. What if I become the last king people care about? Behind palace walls, the crisis was no longer abstract. It had a name: Harry. The damage done by the first memoir had already shaken the institution, but whispers of a second, darker manuscript began to circulate. Pages that allegedly held conversations too explosive for public consumption, accusations that could rattle the monarchy to its bones. Charles, already reeling from the impact of the first revelations, began to spiral into quiet panic. What if the next wave didn't just bruise the royal image, but detonated it entirely? Desperation breeds compromise. It said that Charles, in a rare moment of vulnerability, reached out not to his political advisors or even his closest family, but to the Archbishop of Canterbury. The reasoning was strategic. The Archbishop was untouchable, morally insulated, and trusted by both sides. If anyone could serve as the invisible thread between the king and the outcast prince, it was the man who would soon anoint Charles's head with sacred oil. But this wasn't about faith. It was about containment. What Charles needed wasn't peace. He needed insurance. Inside the palace, paranoia was no longer a figure of speech, it became protocol. My 5 briefings reportedly increased. Staff movements were tracked. Aides were warned not to speak to press, not even off the record. One anonymous insider claimed Charles ordered the removal of all personal recording devices from royal quarters for fear of internal leaks. Surveillance didn't just monitor enemies outside, it began watching within. And in this tightening web of secrecy, Charles clutched to one truth that tormented him. Harry knew too much. Camilla, according to close sources, urged caution, but her private remarks revealed more than concern. In a hushed conversation, overheard by a staffer, she reportedly warned Charles, "He has the power to destroy everything you've waited your whole life for." The threat wasn't just theoretical. It was personal, imminent, and terrifying. The monarchy's image, already fractured, stood one story away from collapse, and so Charles made a fateful declaration. But there was one man uniquely positioned between sacred ceremony and royal scandal, the Archbishop himself. He was supposed to crown a king, not navigate royal warfare. But the Archbishop of Canterbury became the unlikely keeper of the realm's most volatile secret, risking his own sanctity to broker peace between father and son. The Archbishop had long been seen as the spiritual pillar of the kingdom, a man above scandal, beyond politics. But in the weeks leading up to the coronation, his role shifted from ceremonial to conspiratorial. His hands, once raised in blessing, now held secrets that could splinter the monarchy. Caught between his devotion to divine truth and the earthly deception unraveling around him, he bore a burden no spiritual leader should carry. He carried the weight of the Windsors on his back, said one anonymous clergy source, an ominous whisper that would only grow louder as the truth began to emerge. Behind palace gates, confidential correspondences flowed not just between royal advisors, but directly between the Archbishop and both estranged royals. The language in those messages, we're told, was cautious, laced with veiled warnings, spiritual metaphors, and emotional appeals. There was no room for protocol here. This was raw negotiation disguised as pastoral care. Harry, hardened by betrayal, demanded guarantees. Charles, cornered by fear, begged for discretion. And the Archbishop, trapped in the middle, prayed for a miracle that would never come. It wasn't reconciliation they were orchestrating. It was containment. And to do that, every trace of their meeting had to be erased before it began. Tensions between church and crown, already delicate, grew dangerously taut. Senior palace aides reportedly balked at the Archbishop's involvement. His neutrality, once respected, now felt like a threat. One source described heated debates over whether the Archbishop could be trusted to keep the meeting secret. It was in one of these exchanges that he is rumoured to have issued a chilling warning to palace staff. "This must never be recorded." That statement, once dismissed as harmless, now reads like a confession of complicity. But the most damning clues weren't whispered in the corridors, they were spoken in plain sight. Looking back, the Archbishop's public speeches in the days before the coronation carried a strange tension. Lines about redemption, forgiveness, and truth weighed heavy in hindsight. They weren't general reflections, they were coded signals. Warnings from a man caught in the eye of a storm he could no longer contain. He knew something the rest of the world didn't. He had already stood in the same room with both Charles and Harry and witnessed a conversation that could fracture the monarchy's foundation if ever made public. And then, just days before the coronation, a blacked-out vehicle slipped past the palace gates in the dead of night. No cameras, no advisors, just two men bound by blood, divided by betrayal. What really happened during that forbidden hour could rewrite royal history, and the Archbishop's account exposes it all. It began in complete silence. No ceremony, no pageantry. The meeting took place in a private, heavily secured chamber inside Clarence House, one rarely used, always guarded, and, on that night, sealed to the world. Staff were dismissed. Security systems were rerouted. Mobile devices confiscated. According to one high-level source, the room was stripped of anything that could record or betray the moment. The mood was not tense, it was electric, like standing in the stillness before a thunderclap. When Harry stepped inside, the air shifted. Not as a prodigal son returning, but as a man entering enemy ground. The Archbishop, the only other presence in the room, would later say, "There were no smiles, only silence and shadows." The meeting began without protocol. No handshakes, no scripted greetings. Harry, according to an insider familiar with the Archbishop's private account, broke the silence with a line that pierced through decades of royal facade. "I don't trust you." but I'm here." It was not a concession, it was a warning. For Charles, it was a dagger to the heart. Witnesses outside the room reported muffled voices rising, then dropping again into an eerie calm. The king's voice, at one point trembling, pleaded not with authority but with a father's desperation. Words were exchanged that would never reach the public, but fragments of the Archbishop's recollection hint at a man begging for unity, not for family, but for survival. There were no raised voices, no dramatic gestures, just tensions so thick it seemed to mute the walls. Charles reportedly acknowledged past failures, vague apologies coated in ambiguity. But Harry, hardened and resolute, was unmoved. He wasn't seeking remorse, he came with purpose. Sources claim he presented a list of demands, or worse, ultimatums. One, allegedly, was a threat to derail the coronation entirely, not through absence, but exposure. Harry, it is said, made clear he held documents, conversations, correspondences, recordings that could shatter the already fractured public image of the monarchy. He didn't want war, but he came prepared to wage it. And then, the most haunting detail of all. Midway through the conversation, Harry placed a sealed envelope on the table. Thick, unmarked and deliberate. He didn't explain it. He didn't touch it again. The Archbishop reportedly asked neither man about its contents. The envelope remained there, looming like a second crown, one of consequence rather than tradition. To this day, no one outside that room knows what it contained. Some say it held legal documents. Others believe it carried a final threat or an unspoken agreement. But all agree on one thing. Whatever was inside, it changed the balance of power in that room and possibly the course of history. What was decided in that hour remains undocumented, unconfirmed, and dangerously unresolved. But when the three men finally exited the room, their faces revealed nothing. No one spoke. No one looked back. The Archbishop later said the silence that followed was more haunting than the words exchanged, because silence, in this case, wasn't peace. It was containment. It was survival. But even as they emerged from that chamber with practiced calm, the palace would never be the same again. It wasn't a reunion. It was a transaction. And what was promised inside that secret chamber left the palace reeling and the Archbishop begging for absolution. What unfolded during that shadowed meeting wasn't forgiveness, it was leverage. Those present didn't speak as family, but as negotiators locked in a deadly chess match, each guarding their next move. In the aftermath, whispers of a so-called coronation clause began to circulate within the palace walls. According to multiple sources, it was a carefully engineered agreement that allowed Harry a symbolic role in the ceremony's narrative, not center stage, but not entirely exiled either. It was a performance designed to show unity, while behind the curtain, the true cost of that unity had already been paid. The clause, as rumored, came with strings attached: silence, submission, and the suppression of a second memoir. But silence isn't cheap. Allegedly, vast financial incentives were presented to secure Harry's cooperation. Not in open payments, but in quiet benefits. A security package reinstated, trust funds restructured, charitable grants linked to royal foundations. To the public, it appeared Harry was being welcomed back with hesitant grace. In truth, he was being bought, and the Archbishop, the man once entrusted to sanctify the crown, found himself a witness to something far more profane. In private, he is said to have confided to a senior cleric, "It was sacrilege before the sacred. I blessed a throne built on blackmail." He was no longer a mediator. He had become a participant in a royal bargain that mocked the vows he would speak just days later. And then, there was Meghan. Her absence at the coronation was not just a headline, it was a message. To some, it was punishment. To others, a calculated power move. Either way, it drew a line in the sand. Meghan would not stand beside Harry in a narrative that demanded compliance. She would not be used to sell a sanitized image. And in doing so, she forced the public to question, was this unity or theatre? The truth didn't sit well within the palace either. Once the details of the deal leaked to select royal aides, rebellion sparked quietly from within. Long-serving staff members, loyal to the legacy of the crown, were outraged. This was not how monarchies endured. Not by concession, not by silence purchased with titles and checks. One insider, furious and disillusioned, was quoted as saying, "The king didn't crown himself, he sold the crown." That single statement, whispered in corridors and passed along in coded messages, captured the rot at the heart of the arrangement. And as the Archbishop prepared for the sacred rites, as Charles rehearsed the steps that would define his reign, a growing sense of dread began to take hold. Because power secured through silence is never truly safe. Secrets are not graves, they are time bombs. And no matter how carefully this deal had been buried beneath protocol and pageantry, its cracks were already beginning to show. But what happens when a deal built on secrecy begins to unravel in public? In the weeks that followed, strange things began to happen: unexplained leaks, conflicting statements, and a sudden clampdown on royal communications. Someone was talking, and the palace was desperate to shut them up. The media narrative, once tightly controlled and curated, began to unravel. One day, headlines celebrated a tentative thaw in relations between Harry and Charles, hinting at reconciliation and mutual respect. The next, anonymous insiders described a rift deeper than ever, irreparable, bitter, volatile. It was chaos by design or chaos out of control. Either way, the palace's grip on the story had slipped. And as reporters scrambled to make sense of the contradictions, one pattern became impossible to ignore. The truth was leaking, and someone on the inside was responsible. Then came the leak that turned whispers into alarm bells. A classified security memo allegedly intended for internal use only surfaced in the hands of a well-known investigative journalist. The document referenced a level red breach during the final Coronation walkthrough. Its language was vague, but the implications were not. Surveillance footage from within the abbey had been flagged. Equipment had malfunctioned. There were concerns about planted devices. The report did not name names, but speculation exploded. Who was watching the watchers? Who had access? And most crucially, who stood to lose everything if those recordings reached the public? As the rumors spiraled, so did the Archbishop's behavior. His public schedule, once steady, ceremonial, and reliable, suddenly shifted. Engagements were cancelled, appearances avoided. Sources close to Lambeth Palace described a man consumed by dread, visibly shaken, increasingly isolated. Some claimed he requested round-the-clock security. Others believed he'd received warnings, veiled threats not from the outside world, but from within the institution he had tried to serve. He stopped taking calls. He stopped giving blessings. One source described it plainly. He was no longer the Archbishop. He was the liability. Inside Buckingham Palace, panic took the form of digital destruction. Emails between senior officials began carrying a new header: urgent, seal, and destroy. Protocols changed overnight. Staff were instructed to avoid private devices. Paper documents were shredded en masse. It wasn't a cleanup, it was containment. Every trace of that secret meeting was being scrubbed, every loose end tied down with ruthless precision. But even in that atmosphere of fear, the palace couldn't control everything. A journalist with a history of exposing royal controversies reportedly reached out to a source inside the Archbishop's office. The two were scheduled to meet. The reporter never showed. Hours later, their last known location was wiped clean of digital records. Their phone, found abandoned, was missing its SIM card. No investigation, just another name added to a growing list of people who got too close to the flame. And behind the palace walls, tension erupted into fury. Queen Camilla, long considered a force of control and order, was said to have exploded in a private confrontation with Charles. She hadn't been informed of the full extent of the meeting. She hadn't been told about the envelope, and she hadn't been consulted about the deal that now threatened to dismantle the crown's credibility. "You let him in," she reportedly screamed, "and now he's tearing us apart." And then, the final blow came not from Harry, not from Charles, but from the man who witnessed it all. He said he would never speak. But guilt is a heavy crown. In a shocking interview, the Archbishop reveals everything: what he saw, what he felt, and the burden of blessing a coronation built on blackmail. For months, he had vanished from public view, cloaked in silence, while chaos swirled around him. But when the moment came, he didn't return to the pulpit. He chose a podcast, unscripted, unfiltered, unrepentant. In what has now become one of the most explosive confessions in modern royal history, the Archbishop of Canterbury sat before a microphone and did what no one expected. He unburdened his soul. His voice was steady, but his words carved deep. "I feared for the soul of the monarchy," he admitted, a statement that sent shockwaves through the establishment. And for the first time, the man who stood at the heart of the coronation stripped away the pageantry and revealed the sickness he witnessed beneath the crown. He spoke of shadows, of unease, of a palace gripped not by reverence but by fear. There was a spiritual sickness, he said, a darkness that didn't belong in a place of tradition and faith. He described how the rituals felt hollow, how prayers were met with silence, how the eyes of those around him seemed to plead for absolution, even as they orchestrated secrecy. His role had been to sanctify. But he could not deny the desecration happening just beneath his feet. The meeting between father and son, what he once believed was a fragile chance at healing, had instead become a transaction soaked in desperation, and standing in the middle of it all, he now carried the weight of witnessing it unfold. Through tears, he recalled a single line spoken by Harry during the meeting, one that, according to the Archbishop, haunted his prayers long after the coronation ended. "You don't get to erase me," Harry had said. "I'm the truth you tried to bury." That line, he confessed, echoed in his mind every time he looked upon the throne, every time he watched the king raise his hand, every time he bowed his own head. It wasn't just a private memory, it had become a spiritual burden. And now, it was a public reckoning. The fallout was instant. Some within the church praised the Archbishop's courage, calling it an act of moral clarity. Others condemned it as betrayal. Palace insiders went into immediate damage control. Official channels dismissed the podcast as regretful commentary taken out of context. But the words were already out. Uncontrolled, uncontainable. The image of a holy man, broken by what he had witnessed, was far more powerful than any press release. And his final words in that interview would linger longer than any royal decree. "The crown may sit, but it does not rest." Not when it was built atop silence, secrets, and sacrifice. And yet, one question still lingers: what was in the envelope? One object remains the epicenter of it all, a simple envelope left on the table during the secret meeting. Its contents could end a reign or begin a new war. Why won't the palace acknowledge it? And who has it now? The envelope unmarked, unopened, unforgettable. It was placed deliberately, without ceremony, but with the weight of a weapon. Ever since it appeared during that clandestine meeting between Harry and Charles, its existence has haunted every corner of the royal institution. The Archbishop saw it. So did Charles. And Harry? He left it there, as if knowing it would speak louder than anything he could say aloud. But the moment the meeting ended, the envelope vanished. There was no official mention of it in royal logs. No trace in the security report. Even internal memos make no reference to it, as though the monarchy itself is attempting to erase its presence from history. What could it have contained that threatened the palace so deeply? Theories swirl like storm clouds. Some believe it held DNA evidence, proof of a bloodline scandal that would fracture the royal lineage. Others suggest financial records tied to offshore accounts, secret transactions, or bribes disguised as royal stipends. And then there are those who whisper the most damning possibility of all: a letter of abdication drafted by Harry and meant as leverage. A symbolic dagger to the monarchy's throat, forcing Charles to comply or risk a rebellion from within his own blood. No theory has been confirmed, but each carries the same chilling implication. The envelope was never just a message, it was a threat in disguise. And what's most unsettling is the envelope's trail, or rather, the lack of one. Royal staff have reportedly searched the archive logs from that day and found nothing. Surveillance data from the meeting room is either missing or corrupted. Some believe it was intentionally removed, wiped clean by palace operatives, ordered to protect the throne at all costs. A former palace aide, now working in private intelligence, hinted that the envelope was taken by someone not loyal to either side. In a cryptic post, a veteran journalist with long-standing sources inside the firm claimed the envelope is no longer in Britain. The statement, posted and then deleted within hours, set conspiracy forums ablaze. If it's gone, where is it? And who holds its power now? The only man who might have known who was present when it was placed and gone when it disappeared spoke his final words on the matter in a now archived interview. The Archbishop, no longer hiding behind sacred silence, said softly, "The truth is sealed." For now, it wasn't a denial, it wasn't even a defense, it was a warning. Because what's buried is never gone. Not when it's tied to blood, to legacy, to power. In the monarchy, secrets don't sleep, they simmer. And as the world moves on, distracted by royal tours and polished headlines, one truth remains. The crown may shine in public. It may dazzle in ceremony and tradition, but beneath its weight, something darker still stirs. As the crown gleams under the spotlight, a darker tale simmers in the shadows, one of power, blood, and the secret hour that changed everything. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.